When the Berlin Wall crumbled and the Cold War faded into history, the world seemed to breathe easier. Yet for military planners, a new uncertainty emerged. For nearly half a century, strategy had been shaped by the expectation of a massive East-West confrontation. But with the Soviet Union collapsing, Western nations now faced a different question. What kind of fighter aircraft would dominate the skies of the 21st century? It was a question that would lead to two very different answers, one embodied in Britain's Eurofighter Typhoon, the other in America's F-35 Lightning II, born of the Cold War, arriving too late. The Eurofighter project began in the early 1980s, conceived as a joint European effort to build a frontline air superiority fighter that could match and outfly the latest Soviet designs. Britain, Germany, Italy, and Spain pooled resources to create a jet with blistering speed, supercruise capability, and extreme agility. The result was the Typhoon, a twin-engine Delta Canard design with razor-sharp handling, powerful radar, and the thrust-to-weight ratio to overwhelm anything in its path. On paper it was a monster, but history did not cooperate. By the time the Typhoon entered service in the early 2000s, the Soviet Union was gone. Instead of facing swarms of MiG-29s and Su-27s, NATO found itself policing no-fly zones, bombing insurgent positions, and preparing for counterinsurgency wars. The Typhoon, designed for high-intensity dogfighting at Mach speeds, suddenly looked like a jet without a purpose, and worse, it was expensive. The program suffered from spiraling costs, delays, and political infighting between the partner nations. Critics in Britain called it a Cold War dinosaur, a relic designed for battles that would never be fought, compared to the sleek, next-generation promise of the American F-35, stealthy, digital, and multi-role. The Typhoon looked outdated before it had even proved itself. The rise of the F-35. While Europe struggled to field its new fighter, the United States was forging ahead with an entirely different vision. The Joint Strike Fighter program promised a single jet that could do it all: air-to-air combat, deep strike missions, carrier operations, and even vertical landings for the Marines. Wrapped in the cloak of stealth technology and sensor fusion, the F-35 was marketed as the future of air combat, the one aircraft every Allied nation would want to fly. It was smaller, slower, and less agile than the Typhoon, but that hardly mattered, or so the narrative went. The F-35 wasn't supposed to dogfight. It was supposed to detect and kill enemies long before they ever saw it. In war games and glossy brochures, the F-35 was portrayed as untouchable. Too many. This meant the Typhoon was obsolete before the fight even began. Britain's dilemma. For Britain, this was more than a technical debate. The Typhoon was not just another aircraft, it was a symbol of British aerospace engineering, a flagship product of BAE Systems, and a cornerstone of the Royal Air Force. Billions of pounds had been spent, careers invested, reputations staked. To hear critics dismiss it as a relic was a bitter pill to swallow. At the same time, Britain had also bought into the F-35 program, becoming one of its largest international partners. On paper, the two jets were meant to complement each other, the Typhoon as a high-speed interceptor, the F-35 as a stealthy strike fighter, but comparisons were inevitable. When the RAF began integrating both aircraft into exercises, pilots quietly wondered, could the Typhoon really stand up to the jet that was marketed as its successor? The mockery within NATO circles. The Typhoon became the subject of skepticism. Yes, it was fast. Yes, it could supercruise, but in an age increasingly dominated by stealth and sensors, speed and agility looked old-fashioned. Some dismissed the Typhoon as a Ferrari in a world of Teslas, flashy, powerful, but ultimately outdated. This skepticism hardened when the Typhoon's operational debut was limited to enforcing no-fly zones over Libya and Iraq, missions that demanded precision bombing rather than high-speed dogfighting. Critics asked, what good was a purebred air superiority machine in wars where the enemy barely had aircraft? Meanwhile, the F-35 surged ahead in reputation. Despite its own delays and controversies, it carried the aura of inevitability. To many politicians and analysts, the Typhoon was already the past, and the Lightning was the future. Lessons from the past. But history, as always, has a sense of irony. Air combat is never settled on paper. Time and again, jets dismissed as inferior have proven their worth in the crucible of exercises and combat. The F-4 Phantom of Vietnam was initially thought too clumsy to fight nimble MiGs until doctrine and tactics turned it into a killer. The supposedly obsolete MiG-21 would continue to score victories decades beyond its design age. The Typhoon's pilots knew this history well. And they knew something else, that within visual range, where stealth mattered less and physics ruled supreme, their aircraft could do things the F-35 simply couldn't, setting the stage. By the mid-2010s, the RAF began conducting joint exercises with F-35 units. These were meant to integrate the two jets, teaching pilots to exploit each aircraft's strengths. Officially, they weren't competitions. Unofficially, they were exactly that. Pride was on the line. The F-35 was billed as the future. The Typhoon was branded as the past. For the pilot strapping into Britain's twin-engine beast, this was a chance to prove otherwise. And when the moment came, the world would be reminded of a truth as old as air combat itself. Never underestimate the aircraft you laugh at. Because in the unforgiving dance of close-range dogfighting, the Typhoon had teeth sharper than anyone expected. Mini CAR hook. Context. The Eurofighter Typhoon was mocked as a late, overpriced relic of the Cold War, overshadowed by the promise of the F-35. Adversity, yet Britain had invested deeply in it, and its pilots carried the burden of proving their jet's worth against the very aircraft meant to replace it. Resolution hint. In the skies, the Typhoon would show that speed, agility, and skill could still humble the supposed fighter of the future. The Typhoon was never supposed to be laughed at. When first envisioned, it represented Europe's determination to field a jet equal to America's finest, a symbol that Britain and its partners would not be dependent on Washington for air power. Yet, as the years passed, the aircraft became a lightning rod for criticism, and the stakes of proving its worth only grew higher. Political headwinds. The Eurofighter program was a political nightmare from the start. For nations, Britain, Germany, Italy, and Spain each demanded their share of production, contracts, and influence over design. This fractured arrangement meant that decisions took years, costs ballooned, and the aircraft entered service long after its original schedule. In Britain, tabloids lampooned the project as a money pit. Politicians demanded answers about why a jet intended for the 1990s would only begin arriving in squadrons in the 2000s. Every crash during testing, every delay, every budget overrun reinforced the narrative. The Typhoon was a boondoggle. And then came the critics within NATO. To many American observers, the Typhoon seemed like Europe's attempt to reinvent what the US had already perfected with the F-15. Eagle decades earlier, yes, the Typhoon could supercruise. Yes, it had extraordinary agility. But was it worth the billions spent when stealth, the future of air combat, was already on the horizon? The golden child, F-35. If the Typhoon carried the baggage of being too late, the F-35 carried the aura of being just in time. Marketed as the Joint Strike Fighter, it was designed to be the first truly global combat aircraft, flown not only by the United States but also by its closest allies. Britain bought in early, committing billions to the program. The promise was seductive. The F-35 stealth meant it could penetrate heavily defended airspace. Its advanced sensors allowed pilots to see the battlefield in ways no previous aircraft could. Its ability to share data across allied forces made it not just a fighter, but a command and control node in the sky. Compared to that vision, the Typhoon looked like a throwback, a superb dogfighter. Yes, but a single-role specialist in a world that was supposedly moving toward multi-role stealth platforms. Mockery and doubt. The mockery came quietly at first, whispered among defense analysts and rival pilots. But it grew louder as the F-35 program gained momentum. Why invest in a jet that couldn't hide from modern radar when the future was all about invisibility and information dominance? In some quarters, the Typhoon was derided as the last of the dinosaurs, an aircraft clinging to brute performance while the world moved on to digital warfare. Articles questioned its relevance. Commentators claimed that in any real conflict, the Typhoon would be wiped from the skies before its pilots even knew they were under attack. For the Royal Air Force, these jabs stung. Britain had poured resources, manpower, and national pride into the Typhoon. To see it dismissed as a relic was not just an insult to the jet but to the very idea of European aerospace independence. The stakes are proof. This made the upcoming exercises with the F-35 more than training drills. They were proving grounds. Pilots understood that results from these encounters would leak, not in official reports, but in conversations, rumors, and whispers across NATO, and in the tightly knit world of fighter aviation. Reputation matters almost as much as hardware. For Typhoon pilots, the stakes were clear. Demonstrate that their aircraft still had a role in 21st century warfare, or watch it fade into irrelevance. For F-35 pilots, the pressure was different but no less intense. They carried the burden of living up to the enormous hype surrounding their aircraft. The world expected them to dominate. Anything less would raise questions about the trillion-dollar program. Doctrine versus doctrine beneath the surface. This was more than a clash of machines, it was a clash of doctrines. The Typhoon embodied the belief that speed, altitude, and maneuverability remained decisive. Its twin Eurojet, EJ200 engines gave it a thrust-to-weight ratio that allowed vertical climbs and blistering acceleration. Its aerodynamics, enhanced by digital flight controls, meant it could pull tight turns that few aircraft could match. In the unforgiving arena of close-range dogfighting, these qualities could still kill. The F-35, by contrast, embodied the idea that future wars would be won before dogfights even began, by fusing radar, infrared sensors, and electronic warfare into a single package. The Lightning aimed to detect, track, and eliminate threats without ever being seen. In this worldview, agility mattered less than stealth and data. These were two visions of air power set on a collision course. Pilots at the crossroads. Inside Britain's squadrons, younger Typhoon pilots felt the weight of doubt. They knew the rumors that their jet was destined to be overshadowed by the F-35, but they also knew what the Typhoon could do in the right hands. These were two visions of air power set on a collision course. Many had flown against Allied aircraft like the F-16 and even the F-22 during multinational exercises. They had tasted victory before. The question was whether they could repeat it against the jet billed as the most advanced fighter in the world. There was pride at stake, but also identity. To prove the Typhoon's relevance was to defend their own skills as pilots, their own role in the RAV's future. These were two visions of air power set on a collision course. The coming test. By the time British Typhoons and F-35s faced each other in joint drills, the air was thick with expectation. Officially, this was about integration, cooperation, and learning how the two jets could complement each other. But beneath the surface, everyone knew it was about something else. Could the Typhoon still matter? Could it still win? The laughter that had followed the Typhoon for years, the jibes about wasted money, outdated design, and irrelevance would either be silenced or vindicated in the skies. And as history would soon record, the results shocked more than a few skeptics. Mini CIR hook. Context. The Typhoon carried years of criticism, mocked as an overpriced relic, overshadowed by the sleek new F-35. Adversity, yet the RAF's reputation and Britain's aerospace pride depended on proving the aircraft was more than a relic. Resolution hint. In the crucible of joint exercises, the Typhoon would seize its chance to strike back at the doubters. Recount the build-up to NATO exercises where Typhoons faced F-35s, highlight the tension among pilots. The expectation that the F-35's stealth and advanced sensors would dominate, set the atmosphere of competition. This was more than training, it was reputational combat. Compare the aircraft directly. The Typhoon's raw thrust, unmatched acceleration, supercruise and agility versus the F-35's stealth, sensor fusion, and data linking power. Explain why and within visual range dogfights the Typhoon could press advantages against the heavier Lightning. Stress the importance of doctrine and pilot skill. Recount the key incident where British Typhoons scored simulated kills against F-35s in close-range engagements. Explain the rules of engagement that shape the outcome, and how training scenarios can level advantages. Reflect on how this restored pride in the Typhoon. Engagement prompt. What tactical decisions surprised you most so far? Share your thoughts in the comments. Describe further mock battles where Typhoons exploited speed and agility to challenge F-35s. Discuss pilot feedback and how rivalries played out behind closed doors. Explore the growing recognition that the Typhoon remained one of the world's deadliest dogfighters. Build to the psychological moment. British pilots realizing they could outfly the jet designed to replace theirs. Highlight the pride, tension, and disbelief. A moment of vindication for a program once mocked. True resolution and immediate aftermath. The skies over the exercise range had grown quiet. The simulated missiles had been fired, the mock engagements logged, and the pilots were returning to base. But inside the cockpits of Britain's Typhoons, there was a charge in the air that no debrief could disguise. They had not just survived against the F-35 Lightning II, they had outflown it. For years, the Typhoon had been branded as yesterday's fighter, a relic of Cold War ambitions. The F-35 was supposed to be its successor, the sleek new face of Allied air power. But in the crucible of close-in combat, the RAF's Typhoons had shown their claws. And the story, inevitably, began to spread. That kill confirmed. The engagements had been simulated, yes, but within the framework of training rules, the outcome was undeniable. In multiple within visual range encounters, Typhoons managed to position themselves for clean kills on F-35s. Pilots described using raw thrust, sharp turns, and high-speed climbs to force the heavier, less agile Lightning into vulnerable positions. One RAF pilot later recalled in private conversations. The Lightning is fantastic before the merge, but once you're in close, the Typhoon dances around it. That's our world, not theirs. This was not the script the F-35 program had written for itself. The Lightning was supposed to be untouchable, its stealth and sensors making dogfights obsolete. Yet here it was, being outmaneuvered by the very jet it was meant to replace. Shockwaves in the briefing room. The debriefing sessions were professional, but beneath the calm words, there was a current of surprise. F-35 pilots acknowledged that the Typhoon's agility had caught them off guard. RAF instructors highlighted how the Lightning's design, optimized for stealth and strike, came at the cost of raw maneuverability. Nobody pretended this meant the F-35 was a failure. Its strengths in beyond visual range combat and electronic dominance were still formidable. But the exercise had proven something many had dismissed. The Typhoon was far from irrelevant. In certain conditions, it could not just compete, it could win. Word gets out. In military aviation, reputation travels fast. Pilots talk, reports circulate due. Whispers about Typhoon kills against F-35s were making the rounds across NATO. Official spokesmen downplayed the results, stressing that exercises are about cooperation, not competition. But inside the fighter community, the story carried weight. The laughter that had once followed the Typhoon, the sneers about wasted billions and outdated designs suddenly fell quiet. Analysts began to re-examine what the aircraft brought to the table. Commentators who had written it off were forced to acknowledge that the dinosaur still had fangs. Vindication for the RAF. For Britain's pilots, the victories were more than tactical, they were personal. Many had spent years defending the Typhoon against doubters. To see their aircraft go toe-to-toe with the most advanced jet in the world and emerge with simulated kills was deeply satisfying. It was vindication not only for the RAF but also for the engineers and technicians who had poured decades of work into the program. The Typhoon had been mocked for its delays, but now those same design features, thrust, agility, aerodynamic refinement, had paid off. One RAF squadron leader reportedly told his men after the exercise, "Never forget this. They called us obsolete. Today, we proved them wrong." Allies take notice. The aftermath rippled beyond Britain. NATO allies, many of whom had purchased F-35s at enormous cost, began to reassess the Typhoon's value. Nations like Germany and Italy, already flying the jet, quietly pointed to the results as proof that their investment remained relevant. Even outside Europe, air forces took notice. If the Typhoon could score against the F-35, then perhaps agility and raw performance still had a place in modern air combat. Smaller nations weighing procurement decisions began asking hard questions. Was stealth alone enough, or was a balanced fleet wiser? American pilots, to their credit, respected the Typhoon's performance. Many openly praised the RA for keeping the jet sharp. The US narrative did not collapse. The F-35 remained a multi-role platform with unmatched stealth and sensors, but the aura of invincibility dimmed. The myth that dogfighting was irrelevant had taken a hit. Media and public reaction. When news of the encounters inevitably reached the press, headlines were quick to sensationalize. Typhoon outscores F-35 and dogfights became a talking point, often stripped of nuance. Critics of the F-35 seized on the story as proof of the Lightning's shortcomings. For the RAF, this media coverage was both a blessing and a burden. On the one hand, it gave the Typhoon overdue respect. On the other, it risked turning complex training outcomes into oversimplified narratives. Still, for a program long dismissed as second-rate, the positive attention was a welcome change, redefining the Typhoon's role. The true aftermath, however, was not about bragging rights but about doctrine. The exercises reinforced the idea that the Typhoon and F-35 could complement each other rather than compete. The Lightning's stealth could open the battle, striking unseen at range. The Typhoon, meanwhile, could dominate once the fight collapsed into close quarters. Far from being obsolete, the Typhoon was suddenly redefined, not a relic but a sword edge still capable of cutting deep. A lesson in humility. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all was humility. Both aircraft had their victories and defeats, both had strengths and weaknesses. The Typhoon's agility had stunned observers, but the F-35's stealth and sensors still gave it an edge in scenarios beyond visual range. The aftermath reminded everyone, pilots, planners, and politicians alike, that no fighter can do it all. Air combat is a mosaic, a contest of design choices, doctrines, and above all, the skill of the men and women in the cockpit. Closing reflection. For the Typhoon, the exercises marked a turning point. The laughter that had dogged its reputation began to fade, replaced by respect. It was no longer the late overpriced relic of a bygone era. It was an aircraft that, in the right circumstances, could still humble the future. The RAF had not only defended its aircraft's honor, it had defended its own legacy as a fighting force unwilling to be written off. And as the world digested the results, one truth stood clear. The Typhoon still had battles left to win. Mini COR hooked context. The Typhoon's victories in simulated dogfights shocked analysts and silent skeptics. Adversity, yet this was not merely about scoring points. It was about salvaging a reputation nearly buried under years of mockery. Resolution hint in the aftermath. The Typhoon was no longer the butt of jokes but a proven force, reshaping how the world saw the balance between agility and stealth. Strategic reflection and closing thoughts. Reflect on the lessons. There is no perfect fighter. The Typhoon thrived in areas where the F-35 was less optimized. Discuss broader truths about modern aerial warfare. Adaptability. Doctrine and pilot training can tilt the balance even against newer jets. Future-looking epilogue. The skies have a way of humbling arrogance. For years, the Eurofighter Typhoon was mocked as a relic, a jet born too late and destined to be overshadowed by the stealth revolution. And yet, in exercises where it went head-to-head with the F-35 Lightning II, it proved that the story of air combat is never so simple. But exercises, however dramatic, are not the end of the story. They are preludes. The real question is not just how the Typhoon performed in the past, but how it will shape the future. Evolution, not extinction. The Typhoon's journey is far from over. Far from being left to gather dust, it continues to evolve through a steady cycle of upgrades. New AESA radars, advanced electronic warfare suites, and improved missiles are extending its lethality. The Captory radar, in particular, transforms the Typhoon from a purely visual dogfighter into a formidable hunter at long range. Its electronic warfare enhancements give it resilience in contested environments, where jamming and countermeasures can decide survival. Britain has also invested in Project Centurion, arming the Typhoon with cutting-edge weapons like the Meteor Beyond Visual Range missile and the Storm Shadow cruise missile. This ensures that the jet can strike at distance, bridging the gap between its raw agility and the long-reach capabilities traditionally associated with stealth aircraft. Every upgrade pushes back the Typhoon's expiration date. Instead of being a relic, it has become a platform designed for growth. The F-35 matures. At the same time, the F-35 has continued to evolve. Early criticisms about software glitches, maintenance burdens, and limited agility have been slowly addressed. The jet's sensor fusion, its ability to gather, process, and share battlefield information, remains revolutionary. In many ways, it is less a fighter and more a flying data hub, connecting air, land, and sea forces in ways the Typhoon cannot. Its stealth, too, remains a defining advantage. In any real war against a peer adversary, the F-35's ability to remain undetected until it strikes would shape the first phase of combat. Exercises may highlight its vulnerabilities in dogfighting, but wars are rarely fought under such narrow constraints. And so, the Typhoon and F-35 exist in a strange partnership, rivals on paper, but complementary in practice. Complementary strengths. Britain now fields both aircraft, and doctrine increasingly treats them as a paired team. The F-35 penetrates contested airspace, gathering intelligence and striking high-value targets. The Typhoon follows, using its speed and payload capacity to clear the skies and deliver heavier ordnance. The lesson from their exercises was not that one jet should replace the other, but that modern warfare demands diversity. No single fighter can do everything. The Typhoon's brute force and agility complement the F-35's stealth and senses. Together, they offer Britain and NATO a layered air power strategy. This complementarity may prove decisive in future conflicts. Preparing for the sixth generation. Beyond the Typhoon and F-35, the world is already turning toward the next frontier. Sixth-generation fighters. Britain's Tempest project, launched under the Future Combat Air System (FCAS), envisions a jet that merges stealth, sensor dominance, artificial intelligence, and drone teaming. Lessons from the Typhoon versus F-35 debates are shaping this vision. Designers now understand that agility cannot be sacrificed entirely for stealth, nor can speed replace connectivity. The future fighter must blend both philosophies, unseen when needed, but lethal and maneuverable when forced into the merge. In this sense, the Typhoon's story is not just about vindication, it is a cautionary tale, a reminder that tomorrow's fighters must not forget the eternal truths of air combat, the human element. Technology evolves, but one constant remains: the pilot. In every simulated kill scored by a Typhoon against an F-35, it was a human being making the split-second decisions, exploiting openings, and pushing the aircraft to its limits. Future jets may employ artificial intelligence and autonomous drones, but the lessons of the Typhoon remind us that human creativity, the instinct to outthink as well as outfly, still matters. As long as wars are fought by people, the underdog will always have a chance to surprise the giant. Global reverberations. The Typhoon's unexpected victories have had global implications. Nations that once saw it as an overpriced compromise began to reconsider. Germany, Italy, and Spain doubled down on their upgrades. Export customers like Saudi Arabia valued its agility and payload. Even neutral observers recognized that the supposed relic had demonstrated qualities stealth alone could not replace. Meanwhile, smaller nations wrestling with procurement decisions asked a harder question: should they invest everything in the F-35, or diversify with complementary platforms? The Typhoon's example suggested that a mixed fleet might be more resilient than a single solution bet. A fighter's legacy. The Typhoon will eventually leave service, replaced by sixth-generation platforms, but its legacy is secure. It taught the world that agility still matters. It reminded skeptics that mockery is a poor substitute for respect. And it proved that a fighter dismissed as outdated can still dominate in the right hands. For Britain, it will be remembered as more than a machine. It was a vindication of national pride, an aircraft that carried the RAF through a period of transition, and a bridge between the analog Cold War age and the digital stealth-driven era of today. Closing reflection: the story of the Typhoon and the F-35 is not a tale of winners and losers. It is a reminder that every fighter is a product of trade-offs, of choices made in boardrooms and design labs decades before they ever take flight. The Typhoon chose speed and agility. The F-35 chose stealth and senses. Neither is perfect. Both are formidable, but when the laughter faded and the skies were cleared, the Typhoon proved one timeless truth: in air combat, there is no such thing as obsolescence, only adaptation. And as the world now prepares for the next generation of fighters, that truth may be the Typhoon's greatest legacy of all. Mini CAR hook. Context: the Typhoon's story was never just about the past, it was a bridge to the future. Adversity dismissed as a relic, it forced the world to remember the value of agility, adaptability, and human skill. Resolution hint, its legacy lives on in the sixth generation. Designs now taking shape, aircraft that will carry its lessons into the battles of tomorrow.